Rishos Rabbonim, Rishos Dr. Pelkowitz, it's discussed to stand on the same stage as him, almost a one-man force in the front lines of this, I guess we'll use a cliche, we'll call it a battle.
I'm shorter than you are, Steve. So just talk loudly.
See how powerful the Yetzer Hara is? I think it's good now, right? Okay. The topic that we were asked to speak about today, about losing our minds and our families to machines, so I want to divide it into two halves. First of all, the topic of losing our minds. I think it's very important to talk about it because the public debate and the public dialogue about the topic of technology and the Torah community's relationship with it has been dominated to a large part by the discussion about inappropriate material, which is a very important topic for itself, which touches on Kedusha issues, obviously. It touches on societal issues. It touches on addiction issues. And there's no question about it that it's a very, very important topic. But together with that, it's not an existential threat to our way of life as a Torah community. Addiction has to be dealt with. It should be dealt with. It will be dealt with. It's a huge problem. But what's an existential threat to our tzibur as our way of life, as Rabbi Zuivel so touchingly put it at the end of his words last night, that our dreams of our children, what defines our tzibur more than anything else, is the dreams of a Yiddish mama at a Lukas Neres that our children should be Talmidei Chachamim on some level of some sort. That's the dream of a Jewish mother. And that's what, more than anything else, defines us as a society, as a tzibur, our tzibur. The tzibur that's here, the tzibur that we're talking to today, both Eshayesh Nepo and those who we're talking to a broader tzibur. That's our tzibur, that's what defines our tzibur. I think it's very important to put the finger that the challenge of technology that we're facing, as a tzibur, the addiction aspect is not a threat to us as a tzibur. It's a threat to many, many yechidim. But to what I want to speak about today, is a threat to us, as existential threat to us as a tzibur for what defines us and what we want from our children and what we see ourselves as a Torah tzibur for the future, which is based on children who are seeped in learning, who have she'ifas in learning, who are knowledgeable in learning, who are able to build Torah homes, whether or not and when or not they go out to work and go into the workforce. And I want to go talk about that aspect today. Losing our minds to machines. Rabbi Lopiansky, Shlita, the Rosh Hashiva Silver Springs, said in a hesped in Yerushalayim something which triggered my mind. He said, the Gemara says in Gittin that in order to define or the criteria for the level of das, the level of decision making that a child, that a youngster could make in order to make a kinyan, to make acquisitions, to have das, to make a kinyan. So the Gemara says a very interesting criteria. The criteria is, does the infant know the difference between tzror v'zarkoi ve'egois v'noitloi? A tzror is a pebble, and egois is a nut. If the child, the infant, has the ability to differentiate between a pebble and a nut, then it's a sign that he has some sort of das. He has decision-making ability. He has das. He has seichel. So there's a very interesting criteria. What exactly is the difference between an egois, a nut, and a stone, a pebble? So the answer is that both of them on the exterior are identical. They both look the same. They both feel the same. The child takes it, he touches it. He says it's the same thing. Das is the ability to look at something deeper inside, to see past the klipa, to see past the exterior packaging, and to recognize that there's something substantial inside this content here. That's das. And the ability to, A, realize that there's something of depth, of pnimius, of content inside, and the das to access it, is the sign of das. It's the sign of decision making. It's a sign that this cotton has the ability to go ahead and make decisions. The ability to see past the packaging, to see past the gift wrapping. That's das. Tzror v'noitloi, tzror v'zorkoi, egois v'noitloi. I would say that the first challenge that we're having from technology, and I want to discuss particularly facing our children, particularly facing our yeshiva bochurim. Torah, the knowledge of Torah is pnimius. Besides the fact that it's intellectual content, but it's pnimius. It's the inner workings of the bria. It's the inner workings of the soul. The chaye olam nota b'sechenu. Torah by nature is not superficial. Torah by nature is not exterior. Both in its etzem mohus, both in its reality, in its intrinsic nature, and both in the study of Torah. The study of Torah is not something that's sensational. It's not something that gives instant gratification. It's not something that the packaging is exciting. It's like a nut that a person has to break through the klipa. A person has to break through the shell. You have to work hard to get to it. You have to appreciate that there's something there inside. And then to access the inner world of Torah. Torah is like a nut with a shell and a content inside. And Torah, on a more cosmic level, is the pnimius of the bria. It's the pnimius of the bria. It's the internal workings and the internal mechanisms. So on many levels, it's pnimius. It's both on a technical level. It's not accessible easily. It looks like at the beginning like a pebble. It looks hard and uninviting. And you have to crack through and see there's something there. And both on a general ruchnius level, in the bria, the Torah is the internal. The Torah is not the external. The Torah is not the packaging. So we're in a Golus today of Golus Edom. It's fascinating that the Torah Agudah described Edom, the mighty Roman Empire, the mighty nation of Edom, after a seemingly trivial event of ha'odom hazeh, that he sold the Bechorah, he sold his Avodas Hashem, he sold his whole spiritual future for a bowl of cholent, we'll call it. But the Odom ha'odom, the red, was Besach HaKol, a description of it. Why is that the defining moment of Esav, of Edom? L'neitzach nitzachim, till our day, which describes our Golus. So if you think about it, Chazal described Esav as a chazir. A davar acher. A chazir is characterized in Chazal as maret tlofov. He shows his hooves, and he says kosher ani. Pachid Yitzchok explains, Rav Hutner explains, that the yesod of Esav is based on chitzonius, is based on the outer wrappings. He says, I have kosher chitzonius. My dress is kosher. More than that, the Maral says that Esav stole the begodim of Adam Rishon. He walked around dressed up with Adam Rishon's frock. He stole it from Nimrod, who stole it from Adam Rishon, and Esav paraded around masquerading as Adam Rishon. Says the Maral, the Gemara says in Bava Metzia that Yaakov Avinu had the shine of Adam Rishon. Esav wore the begodim, the frock of Adam Rishon. Says the Maral, what does that mean? There are two systems, there are two tracks in the world. There's the packaging, the external track, and there's the internal track. Esav took the begodim of Adam Rishon. He took the externality of Adam Rishon. He took the chitzonius of Adam Rishon. He took his clothing. He wore his frock. He walked the walk. He talked the talk. He said, that's enough. Maret Lafov, he showed his hooves, and he said, kosher ani. I look kosher, no. Internally, I'm not. It's interesting, maybe that's the reason why the Messiah in Klal Yisrael, that the example of something treif is the Chazir, who says, I'm kosher. The one who says that I'm kosher because I look kosher, but I'm treif inside, is what Klal Yisrael and the Chazal picked as the Messiah. That's the biggest treif azach. You shouldn't fool yourself and get fooled by the rapping, by the walking the walk and talking the talk. Says the Maral that Esav took the begodim of adoration. He took the externalism, he took the packaging, he took the wrapping. And Yaakov Avinu took the shine of the neshama, the pnimius of adoration. Yaakov Avinu is MS, so the pnimius, the internality, the reality, the intrinsic mitzias of Adam Harishon, Yaakov Avinu took. And Esav took the begodim of adoration. He took the frock and he said, I'm Adam Harishon. I look like him. I talk like him. That's what we find in Chazal, a remarkable thing. When he got to age 40, he says, I want to get married just like my father got married at 40. The Torah Kadesha doesn't bring jokes. Torah is not a comic book. Gil Arayis, Shvichas Dam Avodah Zarah. I want to get married when I'm 40, just like the Tata. But that's the externalism. That's the wrapping of Esav HaRasha. He walks the walk, he talks the talk, he lives an external life. He's not connected to anything real, to any pnimius. That's Esav HaRasha, the begodim of Adam Harishon, as opposed to the neshama of Adam Harishon. So why is he called Edom? He's called Edom because if one wants to describe the content of something, Esav bumps into a bowl of cholent. It could be described in its ingredients. It could be described in the nutritional content that it says on the bottles. It could be described in its taste. It could be described in its weight. It could be described how much it costs. The color is the most external description of an object that could be. Red doesn't tell me anything about it except for the fact that its package is red, and it's something that catches my eye. Esav is named after Edom because that's the defining moment of Esav. He lived totally externally, and the internal content had no meaning to him. He had no other description of this bowl of cholent other than the fact that it was red. That's total chitzonius, that's total wrapping. That's total outside. That's a nice wrapping with the bow, never opening it up and never cracking the nut to see inside, what's past the shell. That's why our gullus is gullus Edom. It's the gullus of externalism. It's the gullus of wearing the begodim of Adam Harishon. It's the gullus of seeing the nut and not being able to differentiate between the tzror and the egois, between the pebble and the nut and what's inside. Al Kain Koro Shmoi Edom. That's Esav. Yechasemene Chazir Miyoar. The Chazir says kosher ani because all you need to do is to look the look. The greatest challenge that our young generation, Bachurim we're talking about, face from the technology is that they are swept into a world of chitzonius, a world of glittering images, a world of superficiality, which is a contradiction to Limud HaTorah. A K'tzais, a Rabbi Kiva Eger, a Rashba, a Reb Chaim, a Birka Shmuel, and a Tosfos, and a Sfas Emes, and an Agudah require depth. They require ability to identify pnimius. They require ability to sweat it out and break through the shell to get to the pnimius. And in a door of Edom, Ha'odom Hazeh, where the only thing that has value online is the packaging, is the sensationalism, is the chitzonius, is the wrapping. So the minds of the young generation are wrapped into, are drawn into a world, a superficiality of things which aren't important, of things which have no meaning. Haloi, the color red, is the most trivial, the most not important aspect and description of this bowl of lentil soup, as it used to be called when we were young. It's the most trivial, most non-important. and a young child, specifically a bacher who's coming to learn, gets drawn into a world of triviality where things which not are non-important, things which have no value, take on cosmic importance. So then, not only does the packaging become the ikr, and not only does the wrapping have chashivos, that's all there is. There's nothing else. You expect a child like that to go learn a Rajba afterwards and a Ktsais afterwards? And I don't want to be apocalyptic, but I want to say it publicly, and I'm going to put my integrity on the line, that if we don't stop the peer pressure of young children in 6th and 7th and 8th grade for exposure to tablets and to clips. I am not talking about inappropriate material. I'm talking about superficiality. The mothers and the fathers who show their kids harmless clips on a steady basis. I am not talking about something occasional. On a steady basis, 2 or 3 times a day. Harmless. A joke, a clip, a narishkeit, which sends a message to a child that it is something of importance. The weight which is given to ha'adaim, the weight which is given to things which have no intrinsic value, is a direct contradiction. It makes it impossible to a child to come into class afterwards. There is no Rabbi who will be as great and the most talented who can compete with that, because it's not a question of competition, it's a question of what has meaning. It's the tzror v'zorkoi and the egois v'noitloi. We can't compete with that. I'm a Maggid Shir for a number of decades. I could say the most gewaldig, geschmack, deep, interesting shir. That's only if you're willing and you have the das and the appreciation of what's inside the nut, because that's what Torah is. And if we don't get out the message to the parents, I was just in Lakewood now on a trip to visit hundreds of younger light. The tatas and the mamas came crying to me that their 6th and 7th graders are under attack from peer pressure, from other irresponsible parents who are allowing the children devices such as iPod touches and tablets for no reason, and living in a world of virtuality which gives an appreciation to things which have no meaning, and it gives them meaning, it gives them a chashivus. There is no competition. We can't compete with that. And I say clearly that they shouldn't complain afterwards when the child enters high school, Mesifta, Beis Medrash, and they're supposed to begin serious learning. And they're not there. And they're not interested. And we are seeing, it's very deceiving, there's a huge flowering and blossoming of the Olam HaTorah. And one can go into the frum neighborhoods and cities, be it Lakewood or Brooklyn or Flatbush 5 towns, and Bein Hazmanim, the Batei Midrashim are packed with thousands of Bachum who are learning and harving. Thousands, packed. And there are thousands of Bachum who have no time in learning, who are not there, who are not able to appreciate a Rajba or a Ktsais or Kivega, and they will not go off the derech, by the way. They won't go off the derech. There's no reason for them to go off the derech. They're not at risk. They don't have emunah shaylas. And they don't have problems with their parents. And they weren't abused. But they don't have a time in learning. Because learning is das. Learning is the nut behind the shell. It's the pnimius. It's substantial. It's something of content, something which has meaning. And they never get there. They never learn to appreciate it. This is a threat to our tzibur. I've sat with parents in all of our communities, and I've said to them, your child's in a class of 25 boys. There are 6 boys. I'm talking about 7th graders and 8th graders who have devices who are exposed, and their kids are nudging them to death. We also want. And I had mothers who sat with me crying, Yiddish mamas, people are not extreme. People are out there in the world, and they know that the Rebbe in 8th grade will not be able to teach them a Rashba the next day. But there's this peer pressure. And it's time, as a tzibur, all of us, to get up together and create a reverse peer pressure to this godless Edom that we have. And to say, that since most of the problem comes from peer pressure, we have the right to protect ourselves as a tzibur and as yechidim. We have the right to protect our children and the right to bring up our children in the way that we believe and what we want from them and what we believe will give them happiness and fulfillment. I can't stress it enough. It's time as a tzibur that we understood that this is a threat to our way of life. And it's already playing out. I'm not saying a prediction. The numbers are talking for themselves. There are hundreds and there are thousands of children who don't have a geschmack in learning the way they should. It's camouflaged by Baruch Hashem B'li Ayin Hara, the thousands who do. It's camouflaged by the thousands and thousands and thousands who do the yeshiva, and there are thousands who don't. And it's directly because of this. This is not the at-risk phenomenon. These are children who biyadayim, we taught them that nothing is something. That's Golus Edoim. That's the das, to see the difference between a tzror, a pebble, and an egoiz and a nut. The second thing I want to mention quickly, before we move on to marriage, is that I said this at this podium 4 years ago, and I want to say it again. Bekitzer Nimrod's very short in a moment. The second aspect of losing our minds, quote, is the Sforno and Pashas Breishis. He says that after the Chet of Adam Arishon, we know, Chazal bring down, that the Nachash injected some sort of zuhama, some sort of pollution into Chava, into Adam Arishon. Adam Arishon's level, his darga, dropped dramatically after the Chet of Arishon. Says the Sforno, in what did it express itself, that drop? Says the Sforno that the Nachash, the Yetzer Hara, who has Satan, injected the power of fantasy into the system. Why is that the deterioration and the yerida of Adam Arishon after the Chet articulated itself in a world of fantasy? Very simple. Because Rashi says that by Nasa Adam Bitzalmenu Kidmusenu, says Rashi, Bitzalmenu, says Rashi, means lahavinu lahaskil. The divine image is expresses itself in intelligence, in seichel. Bitzalmenu, says Rashi, lahavinu lahaskil. That's the godliness of a person, that he has seichel. So when Adam Harishon lost some of the edge of the Nishmas Chaim after the Chet of Adam Harishon, it expressed itself in Dimion. Because fantasy is the enemy of seichel, fantasy is the enemy of das. The second challenge that our children have because of technology is that they're drowning in a world of fantasy, they're drowning in a world of Dimion, be it the accessibilities of movies and games. And Dimion, fantasy, is a stira, is a paradox, is a contradiction to seichel, to chachma. The two things don't go together on practical levels and on spiritual levels. They don't work together. So if we want a child to appreciate chachma, and his mind is floating in a world of dimion, in a world of fantasy, which gives instant gratification, instant sensual feelings, there's nothing that a Gemara can compete with a fantasy. And the mind, over time, gets atrophied. The knife with which a bacher is supposed to cut a rashba, a ktseser b'kiva eger, or a chaim and a birka shmuel, gets atrophied. The muscles don't work anymore because he stopped using his seichel, which is the epitome of humanity. It's the tzelem elokim mamish. Nasa odom bitzalmenu is lahavenu lahaskil. And that's why the yerida articulated itself in Dimion. In a door that's drowning in a world of fantasy, we can't teach anything. We can't compete with a fantasy world. It's much more exciting. It's custom tailored to everybody's needs at any moment. And it's something that we need to put on the table. The accessibility to kosher fantasy, the overdose of it, is shutting down the minds. Now, again, it's not everybody. There are thousands and thousands of children and bachum who are learning nifla ma'od. They're learning gevaldik. And there are thousands and thousands who have no time in learning, not only because they can't appreciate the inner content because of Edoim, but their minds are Charlie horse. They're out of shape. Their brain muscles have dropped down to dimion, not to seichel. Those are the two challenges facing our young generation if we want them to be Talmidei Chachamim. I want to take the remaining 5 minutes and talk about losing our marriages to machines. There's a lot been spoken about the topic, distraction. I want to say 4 points quickly. I want to finish in time. Number one, the pasuk says in Mishlei, "Ve'es tznuim chachma." People who have tznius have chachma. People who have tznius are wise. Tznius is something about a way of life. Tznius is about being private. What does it have to do with chachma, with wisdom? Explains Rabbi Yosef that if somebody hears something, tznius doesn't mean a way of dress only or a code of life. Tznius means that a person has an internal world inside that doesn't have a need to exhibit everything outside. Says Rabbi Yosef, if a person hears a dvar chachma and he immediately spits it out, he immediately shares it with somebody else, he never experienced it. He never took it in. It never became part of his core. He never absorbed it. He can't have wisdom because he has no shelf. He has no place inside of him where to place the wisdom. He has no inner world. The Alter from Kelm wrote a letter that he once had of Vart that for 22 years he didn't say to anybody because he felt if he would get it out, it would lose the effect. After 22 years, he felt he could share it with somebody else and it wouldn't lose the inner effect that it had on him. I say about myself that I don't wait 22 years, 22 days, months, hours, not even 22 seconds. We have a good Vart, we want to share it with somebody else. Ve'es tznuim chachma, says Rabbeinu Yonah, if you don't have an inner world where to hold your wisdom and hold onto it before you share it, you can never be wise because you don't ever experience the knowledge or the wisdom. So I want to say 4 quick thoughts on this. We live in a world today, and I'm talking about marriage now. We live in a world today where everybody shares everything with everybody all the time. Information comes in, a person hears a story, a vart, or a joke. We don't experience anything anymore. It immediately goes out. So there are 2 fundamental reasons why this directly affects the intimacy of a marriage. A, we don't have what to share with our spouses because we don't experience anything anymore. It's kabbalah kach poltoi. It's the opposite of es snuim chachma. We don't have the time or the patience to absorb and experience the experiences and the information that's being processed by us. So if we don't experience anything, I hear a new wave of questions that I never heard before, where younger light ask me, they don't have what to talk about with their wives anymore. It's funny, there's so much information going on in the world here. They don't have what to talk about with their wives. A, because they don't experience anything anymore. Everything is shared immediately with everybody. So there's no ve'es snuim chachma. To use a halachic term, it's not koine shvisa. It never lands even. It's in and it's out. So there's nothing that's inside that I can share that's part of me. I might be sharing information. It's like reading off the paper to somebody else. That's not an intimate experience. That's not a bond. Second of all, and more so, intimacy in a marriage is based on things which are intimate to us. But if one shares everything with everybody all the time, so what is special about us? What does one share only with his spouse? Every vart, every joke, every story, every incident already went out. Was shared with everybody who knows, who shared it with everybody they know, who shared it with everybody they know. So what is special about our relationship? Is there any story or feeling or hagosha that's miyuchid for us, that's intimate for us? That's a destruction of our marriages. That's a destruction of the infrastructure, of the relationships, of hareyat miyuchedesli, hareyat mekudeshesli, which means you're special for me. Real intimacy begins with things which are shared exclusively by us. And in a world without any boundaries, there's nothing exclusive to a couple Because everything, so there are two aspects. One is, if one doesn't experience anything, there's nothing to share. And the second aspect is that if everything is shared with everybody, then the sharing has no meaning, because there's no intimacy, there's nothing special. This is taking marriages and emptying them out of content, making them hollow. Thirdly, the everyday events which people talk about, which they experience together, don't have meanings anymore. A person comes home from work. He used to say that there was a traffic jam on the way home on the BQE. But his spouse already heard that there was a train crash in Congo, a monsoon in India, a machlekes in Bnei Brak, 2 people who died in Muncie, another train crash in West Africa. And you're coming and telling me that your secretary came late today and her kid has the flu? We became entertainers. And sharing the small things which make up the building bricks of our lives has lost meaning. In a world of sensationalism, echitzenius, people ask me, what did you talk about? I don't know. You bumped into Pliny and he said he's making Shalom Zacher Friday night. Yeah, there was a traffic jam on the way to work. That's what your spouse wants to hear from you. He wants to share your life with them. But in a world of a flood of information and news, the small experiences, the things which have meaning to us as people, has lost meaning as we're drowning in a global world. And that's the third reason why we're losing intimacy. And the fourth reason is, the fourth challenge, Matan Torah is called Yom Chasun Nosoi. Matan Torah is called the day of marriage with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Knesset Yisrael. Before HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah, he shut down the volume of the whole Bria. Even the Malachim didn't say Shira. There was absolute quiet in the world. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't have a volume problem. He could raise the volume on his mic to overcome the chirping of the birds and the fluttering of the Malachim's wings saying Shira. But Yichud, Chasunosoi, means there's nothing going on. Imagine if a person, a chassan, gets married to a kala and into the yichud room, or while the kala is going around the 7 hakafas, he pulls out his phone to see the highlights. And the kala starts to cry. And he says, I'm using out the time. The rest of it, we're going to be busy. Or in the yichud room, he pulls out a paper to check. There's no way there could be intimacy of Yom Chasunosoi with so much background noise going on. And Matan Torah, because it was Yom Chasunosoi, because it was an act of ultimate intimacy, HaKadosh Baruch Hu required that there be absolute silence in the world, not because God's voice couldn't be heard, but because that's the nature of the kesher, that Einoid Milvade, there's nothing else going on. And those are the 4 challenges that we're facing. We need to experience things and keep it in. We need to keep things private and intimate and make boundaries. We need to give a chashivas to the small things in our lives which have meaning and detach ourselves from the global tumult going on around us. And we need to have Einoid Movadoi. We need to create our own Dalet Amis. We need to create our own sense of privacy. We need to lower the background noise. As a tzibur, these are the challenges that we're facing, both in our minds, our das, and both our marriages. If we come together and we create reverse peer pressure, that this is not acceptable, this is an existential threat on our way of life, on our future generations, we can together be secure with ourselves and be confident with ourselves. And obviously, with Siyata Dishmaya, overcome it and continue to build Heilige Doiris at Bias Girl Tzedek Meher B'Yameinu.